Prologue. A rare act of mercy. In a judicial system known for its strict adherence to the law, a single act of clemency can echo through decades, subverting expectations, inspiring debate, and laying bare the delicate balance between justice and mercy. Recently, Singapore's cabinet recommended that President Tharman Shanmugaratnam commute the death sentence of a drug trafficker, Tristan Tan Yi Rui, to life imprisonment. The motivation: to reduce disparity between his fate and that of his co-offender, whose circumstances differed only slightly but whose sentence was less severe. Ground news. This decision, described by officials as an act of executive grace, represents the first such commutation since 1998, breaking a long-standing pattern of rare clemency in capital cases in Singapore. Ground news. Understanding clemency in Singapore's justice system. Clemency is an extraordinary remedy. It's a power reserved for the highest executive authority, the President, acting on the advice of Cabinet. It intervenes only when the judicial process has run its full course, beyond appeals. Since independence in 1965, Singapore has granted clemency in only 6 cases. Medium. Function 8G. A testament to the rigor and restraint inherent in its legal tradition. The last clemency was granted in 1998 to Mathavakannan Kalimuthu, who was convicted of murder at 19, sentenced to death, but ultimately had his sentence commuted to life imprisonment by President Ong Teng Cheong. Wikipedia. That was over 27 years ago. This new case, therefore, is not just rare. It revisits and possibly reshapes a precedent-laden chapter of Singapore's legal history. The latest clemency. Reducing disparity between outcomes. The case of Tristan Tan Yi Rui. The Cabinet, in recommending clemency, emphasized the principle of reducing disparity. Although Tristan Tan's death sentence was legally sound, his co-offender, convicted in a related crime, received a lighter sentence. The glaring inconsistency prompted the Cabinet to intervene with clemency, aiming to align outcomes more fairly. Ground news. Justice isn't only about following statutes, it's about ensuring comparable cases yield comparable results. When similar defendants are treated differently, public trust in the legal system can be undermined. In this instance, the decision reflects the state's willingness to acknowledge and rectify such disparities even at the death penalty stage. Significance of the move. First since 1998, this break in a decades-long drought of death penalty clemencies makes it historically significant. Executive conscience in action. It highlights that the Cabinet isn't merely an observer but can actively shape justice through subtle recalibration. Focus on fairness. The language of reducing disparity signals a value-driven choice. Beyond technical defense or mercy appeals, it underscores principled equity. Historical context. Clemency in Singapore's criminal justice. These rare acts demonstrate how exceptions can illuminate the norm. Mathavakannan Kalimuthu, 1998, granted clemency due to youth and possibly mitigating factors. He became the 6th such recipient since independence. Wikipedia. Sim Ah Cheoh, 1992, a drug trafficker whose sentence was commuted from death to life imprisonment. She later died in 1995 after being released to receive treatment due to terminal cancer. Wikipedia. Reddit. Koh Swee Beng, 1992, another rare case. After receiving a death sentence for murder, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment 2 days before his scheduled execution. Wikipedia. These instances illustrate how sparing sentences, even on rare occasions, rest on a combination of personal circumstance, public sentiment, judicial reflection, and executive discretion. Broader legal reforms and alternatives to the death penalty. The Singapore legal system, while firm, isn't static. Amendments in drug trafficking laws 2012 introduced nuanced sentencing, allowing judges discretion in cases such as couriers or those with mental impairments. Pen. Southeast Asia Globe. Evolving principles. The law now allows, in certain conditions, alternative punishments to the death sentence, recognizing the distinction between masterminds and minor participants. Southeast Asia Globe. These shifts point to an incremental move toward calibrated justice, especially in non-violent drug crimes. Human rights and public engagement. Singapore's capital punishment policy extends beyond courts. It intersects with society, manners, and global norms. International scrutiny. In high-profile cases, such as Negentran K. Darmalingam, a mentally disabled Malaysian drug offender facing execution, global human rights groups and public campaigns called for clemency on disability and fairness grounds. Arab News. Transformative Justice Collective. Advocacy and awareness. Civil society's growing involvement, public petitions, legal advocacy, and media discourse has prompted citizens and authorities to re-examine the imperatives of mercy and rehabilitation. Eligibility for reprieve is not only a legal process. It's shaped by public awareness, ethical argumentation, and evolving values. What lies ahead? The ripple effect of this clemency. Setting a new precedent. This rare act of clemency emphasizes that reducing unjust disparity is now recognized as a valid reason for executive mercy. It may shape how future cases are evaluated, especially those involving co-offenders or inconsistent sentencing. Legal watchfulness. Will they next reconsider cases involving vulnerable offenders, such as minors, the mentally ill, or couriers, more readily? Will evolving legislative criteria, like substantial assistance certificates, gain greater importance in reducing death sentences? Public and institutional vigilance. Now that such an act has occurred after decades, civil society may remain more alert, advocating for fairness, pushing for transparency, and engaging in constructive dialogue. Epilogue. Mercy in the scale of justice. What we've seen is more than a legal footnote. It's a moment that reflects a system's capacity for reflection, adaptation, and compassion. In recognizing disparity and acting upon it, the state exercised a form of humility, acknowledging that, even within structured laws, moral conscience remains vital. This clemency invites us to consider, when laws intersect with human lives, justice is more than punishment. It is, at its best, equitable, humane, and just. When mercy interrupts the rope. Singapore's rare clemency case. A turning point in Singapore's legal history. In the dense corridors of Singapore's judicial system, renowned worldwide for its clarity, consistency, and uncompromising stance on crime, one announcement recently reverberated with an almost shocking resonance. A man on death row, Tristan Tan Yi Rui, convicted of drug trafficking, was granted clemency. His death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, a decision that came not because the law was misapplied, nor because of new evidence, but because the cabinet recognized the unevenness of justice. His co-offender, convicted under strikingly similar circumstances, had received a lighter sentence. The cabinet's recommendation to the president, carried through, ensured that disparity would not become a scar on the nation's conscience. For Singapore, this was extraordinary. Clemency in capital cases is exceedingly rare. Since independence in 1965, only 6 known cases have been granted clemency before this one. The last time mercy interrupted the noose was 1998. Over a generation ago. This latest decision forces us to ask, why this case? Why now? And beyond that, what does this reveal about Singapore's approach to justice, fairness, and mercy in the modern age? Clemency in context. Power beyond courts. To appreciate the gravity of this move, one must understand what clemency means in Singapore. Clemency is not an appeal. Once the courts have spoken and appeals exhausted, the judicial process is considered final. The power of clemency rests solely with the President, but it is exercised only on the advice of the Cabinet. It is described as an act of grace, a last safeguard, a mechanism for mercy that exists beyond the rigid framework of law. In Singapore's history, clemency has been used sparingly. The few times it was exercised often revealed extraordinary circumstances: youth, diminished responsibility, terminal illness, or compelling humanitarian grounds. By design, clemency is rare, precisely because Singapore prizes certainty in law. To wield it too freely risks undermining the deterrent value of strict sentencing. But wielded too seldom, it risks rendering the power irrelevant. This latest act reminds us that even in the sternest justice system, there remains a place for compassion balanced with principle. The case of Tristan Tan Yi Rui, a story of disparity. Tristan Tan's conviction, like many others, arose under Singapore's harsh drug trafficking laws. Drug trafficking above prescribed thresholds carries the mandatory death penalty, unless mitigating conditions apply. In this case, both Tan and his co-offender were convicted. But here lies the turning point. The co-offender's circumstances qualified him for a reduced sentence. Tan, by the strict letter of the law, did not. The result: one man faced life imprisonment, while the other faced execution. From a purely legal perspective, nothing was amiss. The law was followed, evidence was weighed, and judgments were properly handed down. Yet, from a broader moral perspective, the Cabinet recognized an unacceptable disparity. Justice, after all, must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. By granting clemency, the government corrected a gap that courts, bound by statutes, could not. Looking back, when Singapore last chose mercy, the rarity of clemency heightens the weight of every instance it is granted. Before Tristan Tan, the last notable case was Mathavakannan Kalimuthu in 1998. Mathavakannan, only 19 at the time, was convicted of murder. The law left no discretion. The mandatory penalty was death. But his youth, background, and the circumstances of the crime were compelling enough for then President Ong Teng Cheong, acting on Cabinet's advice, to commute his sentence to life imprisonment. Earlier in 1992, another striking case unfolded. Sim Ah Cheoh, a mother convicted of drug trafficking. After years on death row, she was spared the gallows, partly due to her role being considered minor, and partly due to her terminal illness. She was later released on compassionate grounds, and died in 1995 from cancer. Such cases illustrate that clemency is not about exonerating the guilty. It is about recognizing the humanity behind the conviction and ensuring proportionality when rigid statutes fall short. The global lens. Clemency around the world. To fully appreciate Singapore's stance, it helps to see how other nations wield clemency. United States. Clemency is a presidential or gubernatorial power. In some states, it is used more liberally, sometimes to address systemic unfairness, racial disparity, or evolving societal values. Malaysia. Similar to Singapore, clemency is rare but possible. Several high-profile drug trafficking cases have seen intervention at the 11th hour. Europe. With most European states having abolished the death penalty, clemency powers still exist but are more symbolic, applying to life sentences instead. Singapore's approach stands out for its exceptional restraint. Where other jurisdictions might use clemency as a pressure valve against systemic flaws, Singapore tends to rely on legislative reform, amending laws when necessary, while keeping clemency as the rarest of exceptions. Voices behind the curtain. Families, activists, and critics. Behind every death penalty case lies a network of human voices. Grieving families, relentless lawyers, passionate activists, and often a society divided. Families of the condemned. For the relatives of those sentenced to hang, every appeal, every petition, and every clemency plea is a fight against the clock. Families of past prisoners like Negentran K. Dharmalingam, the Malaysian with an IQ of 69 executed in 2022, spoke of endless nights drafting letters, begging for mercy, only to be told that the law had run its course. Activists. Civil society groups like the Transformative Justice Collective argue that Singapore's rare clemency use reveals the rigidity of its justice system. To them, this latest commutation represents not just an isolated decision, but a signal that even the government acknowledges the potential for unfairness. Critics. On the other side are those who argue that clemency risks undermining deterrence. Singapore's low crime rates are often attributed to its uncompromising laws. For them, exceptions, even justified ones, must remain vanishingly rare. Law, mercy, and the philosophy of justice. This case forces society to revisit timeless philosophical questions. Should justice prioritize deterrence or equity? Can mercy coexist with a justice system designed to be uncompromising? Does disparity, even when legally justified, corrode public faith in fairness? From Plato to modern jurists, thinkers have argued that laws must serve both justice and humanity. If justice is blind, mercy is the gentle hand that guides her away from cruelty. In Singapore's context, this act of clemency suggests that justice without mercy is incomplete. What this means for the future. The commutation of Tristan Tan's sentence may be a singular decision, but its implications ripple outward. Precedent of fairness. It establishes that disparity alone can justify clemency. This could guide future cases where co-offenders face drastically different outcomes. Renewed attention. Civil society will likely intensify calls for transparency in clemency processes, urging clearer communication about when and why mercy is granted. Incremental shifts. While wholesale abolition of the death penalty remains unlikely, Singapore may continue refining its laws to allow greater judicial discretion, lessening the need for clemency. Conclusion. Mercy in the midst of justice. Clemency is not the undoing of justice, it is its companion. Where the law demands rigidity, clemency injects flexibility. Where statutes cannot bend, mercy provides balance. In sparing Tristan Tan from the gallows, Singapore has reminded the world that even in one of the world's strictest legal regimes, compassion is not extinguished. It does not erase his crime. It does not rewrite the law. But it prevents disparity from festering as injustice. And perhaps, in that rare alignment of mercy and law, society can glimpse what true justice aspires to be. Not only lawful but also humane.